This video is sponsored by Noragon, the commercial vehicle data experts. Visit noragon.com to learn more.
Switching fuels for your trucks is like going all in when you're playing poker. You can do it right away, but the really good players wait for the most strategic moment. For fleets looking at electrification and/or reduced emissions, the right moment may be right now, but it may not. It all depends on application, infrastructure in the areas where your trucks run, and a host of other things. For those fleets who haven't gotten that royal flush they're looking for, when it comes to trailers, there is another option for cutting emissions: hybridization. Again, it depends on your application and routes, but if you're looking to cut emissions but aren't ready for full electrification, it could be worth considering. To talk about trailer hybridization and the stepping stones between diesel and full electrification, I'm joined on this episode by Paul Kroes from Thermo King. Let's go to the interview with Paul. All right, so today on the Road, we are here with Paul Kroes from Thermo King. Paul, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Glad we're going to have a good discussion about trailers today, so let's jump into that. So the topic today is going to be about hybridization in the heavy-duty trailer industry, and just to get started, I wonder if you could kind of walk me through the basics of that. You know, what does that look like, and kind of what effect does it have on trailers?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I love this topic. It's been something that's been asked about quite a bit lately. So I like to start out with, I think, clarifying a little bit just to make sure that we're all kind of talking the same thing. Mostly because the term hybrid in the refrigerated trailer space has been around for many, many decades, really. Thermo King's had hybrid refrigerated solutions, going back really decades for us. And in that sense, it's usually been used to mean the units can be plugged in when they're stationary. So, you don't have to run them on diesel if you're parked in a distribution center yard, for hours or days or months on end. Technically that's a hybrid because it can run on electric and it can run on diesel when it's on the road. What we're really talking about here is kind of that more, I'll say, traditional sense of what consumers consider hybrids. When you think of like hybrid cars in particular, where it can run in both diesel or electric when in motion. And so that's when we talk about hybridization. It really is around that, taking that electric operation mode with you while you're on the move. So I just want to make sure that we kind of clear that up for anyone listening, so they kind of know what direction we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a good point to make, for sure.
Yep. So then if we start to talk about kind of what that looks like in the market, or in the industry over the next couple of decades, there's a couple of reasons why it's really important to talk about. Primarily, it really has come up, and it's the same thing on consumer vehicles. It's range anxiety in all electric systems is a real thing, right? For us as consumers, and I've had an EV car for about a decade now, so I've certainly come across situations where I'm worried about, am I going to get to where I'm going, or at least I have to be very mindful and planning on where am I going to stop, how far can I go. You have the same problem in the transport refrigerated space. But the problems there are really compounded in, it's not just like you run out of juice on the side of the road and have to wait for someone to come get you. If you run out of power on your electric refrigeration units, you lose a load, right? And that is hundreds of thousands of dollars or more. And that is a very, very expensive problem. And at Thermo King, we consider that kind of a cardinal sin of, thou shalt not allow a customer to do that if it's within our means to keep that from happening. So it's something we're very mindful of, and why hybridization is such an important step in getting towards that electrified, decarbonized future. So with that in mind, then, the question really is, like, what does this whole transition look like? We're at the current state where, the vast majority, only a small fractional percent of the market is operating electric units. Not everyone, but large fleets want to operate electric units. They want to reduce fuel emissions. They want to decarbonize. And they're really trying to understand what does that look like, even from a small step standpoint. How do they dip their toes in? And what we've realized over the last few years through demonstrating electric units with our big customers and fleets is there's a lot of, again, range anxiety. There's a lot of operational challenges associated with transitioning to all electric. Infrastructure is certainly one of the, if not the biggest hurdle to it, right? Just understanding where to plug in, not just at home, but on the road. And hybridization, which means keeping the engine in the system, is a really good way to what I consider, it's like having training wheels on your transition plan, right? As a kid, you don't just hop on a bicycle and learn to ride the bike that very minute, right? You're going to fall down, you're going to get scrapes, and that's the same as like losing a load. Well, we want to prevent that from happening. We want to create a safe, reliable environment for them to learn to transition. And that's what the engine is, right? It's that training wheel that when you first get on it, you're leaning back and forth. You're probably running that engine more than you'd like, but that's okay, right? You learn, you look at the data, and then over time, you realize you're not ever leaning on that diesel engine anymore, and you take it off, right? You can say, look, I don't need it, and you go all electric, right? So that's the future state. And that's where hybridization, I think, is really key in doing it. Because if you were to go tell a fleet you have to transition today from all diesel to all electric tomorrow, it elicits a lot of fears, and rightfully so. And we want to keep that fear from getting in the way of progress.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that's much easier said than done in a lot of those cases.
Yes.
So you mentioned there are some operational challenges with going all electric. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, certainly. So it's been very interesting as we have demonstrations, electric unit demonstrations with fleets, and everyone kind of goes into it with what we think that their usage is going to be, how they run their units even in their yard or take them out about. And what we find throughout and after the demonstration period is they use their units usually very different than how they think. And it's not because of just kind of ignorance on it. It's more of, the operators are human. They'll forget to plug them in, or they'll plug them in late, or they'll forget to turn them on, and they have to hold the units down when they're not plugged in, which consumes a lot more power. They'll get stuck in traffic, or the days are hotter than we think. And so we all tend to gravitate towards the average, but we forget that there's a big, use cases well outside that average period where that can cause problems. And for us, it's, like if we're designing to that 50th percentile, that's great, but we've got to get to that 99.99% use case to make sure they don't have that lost load. Right? 95% isn't even good enough, because that leaves that 5% error. And that's, again, how do we avoid that? So it's kind of getting everyone to understand there's a big breadth of how units actually get operated when you introduce the human factor and nature. And so that's where, like, operationally, it's a really big deal for everyone to get some experience. But again, where the training wheels of the diesel engine come into play, because you can do it without fear.
This is more of a general question, but for fleets who are looking to kind of achieve sustainability goals, cut emissions, that sort of thing, any advice for them on the trailer side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times fleets ask this question, which it does get asked often. The first thought is, well, we need to electrify, we need to take the diesel engine out, right? And again, that's the whole point of this conversation. But there's a lot of things you can do before you ever get to that point. It certainly goes back to the first thing that comes to mind is when I clarified the definition of hybrid up front. Units are capable of being plugged in. They have for many years. The reality is very little of them actually ever get plugged in. So it's the first thing I tell fleets is start trying to do that. It's not that easy though, and the reason why units don't get plugged in often is infrastructure. And the infrastructure isn't entirely different than what you need for an electrified asset. It is easier, and there are usually quite a few grants and funding available through utilities to help fleets do that, because the utilities want to sell more electricity, so they're more than willing to subsidize running power to dock doors and other areas for trailers to be plugged in. We have some major fleets that have started to do that, and operationally it's not easy either, but it makes a tremendous difference in reducing your runtime. In a lot of those same distribution fleets, typically half or more of their runtime is in their own yard. Right? They're not even out on the road when they're running them. If they're in their yard, that is a great place to start to plug those in and let them run off the grid. Even a 5 or 10% transition to that is a really big deal. Then there's a couple other smaller things that we've always tried to help fleets understand when they ask, what can I do to be more efficient? It's, better construction of the trailer, better decisions on insulation, stuff that just makes the refrigeration unit have to run less. You can put it in modes that don't make it always run, so it senses temperature. We call it cycle sensory. You can transition to those and start to save, double-digit runtime very easily. And those are things that you can do pretty much overnight on existing equipment, so it's not even having to acquire new technology to achieve it. So I think we can make a lot of progress as an industry in reducing fuel consumption without having to even enter the electrification conversation. But you do reach a certain point where you have to start to add a battery or some power storage on the trailer and take that with you to have it be practical.
Well, thanks so much, Paul, for coming on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this, so thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.